Each and every one of you. At this time, as I leave this platform, I want you to receive and welcome our very first speaker on today, my good friend, my brother. I love him to life. He get on my nerves, but I love him to life. He is the executive pastor of Community Christian Center, the owner of the Art Finance. Y'all show some love for brother Pastor Joe Hughey.
We're going to go on a little bit of a journey. It's going to be an expedited journey. So I'm not going to be up here in front of y'all all morning. But I'm going to give you some tools and some resources that you can use to carry yourself forward from here. So first and foremost, like Pastor said, my name is Joel Hughey. I'm the executive pastor here at Community Christian Center. I am also the principal owner of ARC Financial Strategies, and by that I mean I own an investment advisory firm, and I own the firm. I don't work for nobody. There ain't no boss behind me. There's no company behind me. It's mine and God's. I have one wife. I'm gonna come back to why that's important in a minute. I got 3 kids. My oldest is 29. My son is 24, and my youngest daughter is 22. First and foremost, what I want you to know most about me is that I am a child of God. And it's important to understand why you need to be a child of God. All right, professionally, I have an insurance license, an annuity license, and a long-term care license. In addition to that, I have a FINRA Series SIE, a Series 6, a Series 63, a Series 65, a Series 7, and a Series 24 General Principles license. I manage millions of dollars of other people's money, and I oversee a team of financial services professionals whose job it is to make impact and change in people's lives. So today, we're going to jump into the basic systems that go along with you being a man of God. And how to combine both God's system and the world system and pull them together to accomplish what it is God set out for you to accomplish with your personal finances. So the first thing I want you to kind of have an understanding of is how to continue to grow in this space. So if you have not, right, subscribe to our YouTube channel, I'm going to need you to do that right now before I teach you and tell you anything else. So get your phone out. This is an activity, right? We're going to go to YouTube, right? You're going to get your phone out. This is an activity, right? We're going to go to YouTube. You're going to go to 3C Ministry RVA. 3C Ministry RVA. When the screen pops up, push the button that says subscribe. Once you do that, you're going to find playlists that are available to you on the church's YouTube channel, right? So there's Money on Purpose. There's our new series that's there as a playlist. And if you keep looking down, you're going to see ARC Financial Strategies playlist that's available to you there, right? So those resources are available to you on demand. Watch it at your leisure, because I'm not going to have time this morning to dig into the weeds, right? So we're going to stay at the top level. And then the next thing I need you to do is to connect with the Iron Man Fellowship. That one I'm not going to do as an activity. I'm going to let you float on through it. But it's important that you know when we're doing stuff and why we're doing stuff and how we're doing stuff. And the easiest way for us to tell you that is for you to connect, right? So if you text Iron Man, M-A-N, the telephone number is 804-636-3309. Once again, 804-636-3309. Text the word Iron Man. That's step 1. Step 2, you're going to get a response. And we need you to give us your name and your email address because we don't want to talk to your phone number, right? So connect with us in that space. Give us the information. We'll make sure that you stay up to date. All right, so that's the highlights, right? So now let's get into this journey, right? So the first thing I want you to understand is that God has a system for every area in your life. He has a system for your wealth, a system for your health. He has a system for you connecting with him and growing. He has a system for your family. All of these systems are in his word. We have to dig into his word and pull those systems out, right? So we're going to spend our time this morning going through God's finance system, and then we're going to connect the dots of how we pull that over and to use the tools that the world has available to us. First and foremost, I want you to jump into the concept that God has with personal finances. And it comes from a very familiar passage of Scripture. You probably just have never thought about it this way. So John 3:16, what does it say? Okay, so that's 3:16 right there. We don't need to go to 17. We stay right at 16, right? So for God so loved the world that he did what? He gave. How does God define love? By giving. Got to get that. God defines love through giving, okay? So that's how God set the system in place. Then I can choose to fight against the system, or I can choose to follow the system, right? So when I began to study the system and I began to look at how God pulled that together for us financially, it took me back to the book of Genesis where God made man. So God made you, and he gave you an assignment. There are 4 parts to your assignment. You have to understand all 4 parts and how they work together. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 says, and God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. That's your job. So if you run around as a man going, I don't know what my purpose is. I just told you what your purpose was. Your purpose was be fruitful, multiply, to replenish the earth and to subdue it. That's your purpose, right? Now, how you go about walking out your purpose, God left that part up to you. He gave you some gifts and some talents we're going to talk about, but that's your purpose, right? So I began to dig into that, right? So to be fruitful means that I'm ever increasing, right? I'm ever increasing. To multiply means I'm always producing, right? To replenish means I got to fill it up and I got to burn it out, right? And to subdue means that I have dominion, right, over the area of my life, right? And if you think you can have dominion without having financial resources, you're confused. And I'll help you to understand that, right? Who going to work on Monday morning but don't want to? You don't have dominion. That's your first sign that you don't have dominion, right? Now, God gave you a purpose. What did God tell you to do? Be fruitful, multiply, replenish, and subdue. Have some dominion, right? So if I don't have a plan in my life to have dominion, I'm not in line with the way God designed me to be. I got to get back on the plan that God designed, and I got to get myself in a position to have dominion. From there, I began to study and look at God's banking system, right? That may be the first time you ever even heard that. God has a banking system, right? And if you are plugged into God's banking system, then you get to use his resources. If you're outside of God's banking system, you don't get to use his resources. So real quick, God's banking system. God chose Abram, right? Abram had how many sons? Okay, so Bible study is on Tuesdays at 7:30. Right here, you already know where to come, right? Tuesdays at 7:30, right? All right, so Abraham had 12 sons, right? Each son had a gift and a talent, right? He gave each one of them a job, right? Except for one. One of the sons didn't get an inheritance, right? His name was Levi. Levi didn't get an inheritance. Levi's job was to manage the relationship between God and the family. That was Levi's job. He was the head priest. Everybody else got resources, right? Somebody was the hunter. Somebody was the fisherman. They all had jobs to do. Levi's job was to maintain the relationship between God and the family, right? Which was why God set up this system where the other brothers took care of Levi, because they understood if we lost our relationship with God, we lost our protection. We lost our provision, right? We lost our leadership, right? Mission Manhood is all about helping you to understand that manhood is leadership. That's what manhood is, right? And once you embrace the fact that you have to learn how to become a leader, you understand why your financial resources are one of the most important parts of your leadership, okay? So in God's banking system, he designed everything that you need is equipped in the banking system, right? So now, I don't control all parts of the banking system. I control the part of the banking system that applied to me, right? So then they came together as brothers, and each brought their tenth, we're going to get back to in a minute, right? Back to the storehouse, right, which was the temple where Levi was, right? And then Levi was able to take care of his family based upon the tenths that he got from the other 11 brothers, right? That was God's banking system, right? So back then, if your husband died, right, you didn't have anybody to provide you with resources, right, which is where the word widow comes from, right? So who took care of the orphans and the widows? The church took care of the orphans and the widows. Where did the church get the resources to take care of the orphans and the widows? From the brothers. From the brothers, right? The community brought the resources to the storehouse. The storehouse was then able to take care of the orphans and the widows, right? That's God's banking system. And you got to understand that it's systematic, because if you don't, you'll fight against the system. And what happens when we fight against systems? We lose. Every time, right? Don't believe me. Go on all 95 minutes. Do 100. See what happens to you, right? Especially if you're in Hanover County, because they got about 700 police officers, right? You're going to jail. You fighting against the system, right? All right, so from there, began to actually dig into the system, and I wanted to understand, why in the world would God give us resources, right? Why would God give us resources, right? So Matthew chapter 16, verse 24 and 27, I'm just going to summarize it for you guys this morning, helped me to understand why God gave us resources. So the word tells us there that God is going to provide for us everything that we need, right, so that we can do good work. I always say, if you read the Bible forward, then read the Bible backwards, right? So when you read the Bible backwards, it starts at the end of the thing, and then it walks you back to the beginning of the thing. Well, when you get back to the beginning of that passage of Scripture, it says, if you sow sparingly, you will reap sparingly. It goes on to say that God loves a cheerful giver. Now, I don't know about y'all. I was 41 years old before I understood what that passage of Scripture meant, because I ain't never enjoyed giving away no money. None. For nobody, right? So I struggled with that one for a long time. I'm like, cheerful giver. I'm like, right? But when I began to dig into it and studied and learned to understand that God has a system, and when I plugged into the system, I get the results. That's when I became cheerful. See, when you're fighting against the system, you're unhappy with it. Once you understand the system, you become cheerful. Then it says that God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you may have all sufficiency at all times. So which economy do you want to participate in? The world's economy or God's economy? God said in his economy, you're going to have all sufficiency at all times. I don't care nothing about no tariff. I don't live in, I'm not an American, in case y'all didn't know. I'm not an American. I'm an ambassador to the kingdom. You could be an American if you want to. I'm an ambassador to the kingdom, because the banking system in heaven says, I have all sufficiency at all times. America will let you go broke. I'm not an American. I'm an ambassador to the kingdom, right? And when I began to understand that God's system will give me all sufficiency at all times, right, then I had to realize, okay, now what do I have to do to qualify for all sufficiency at all times, right? He told me right there in Corinthians, he said, you got to do good work. You got to do good work. So the question I began to ask myself is, okay, well, what is good work? Right? Because if good work gets me all sufficiency at all times, should I spend my time and effort and energy on anything else? How many of us have come up short before? Right? So we all agree that program does not work. I need to find another plan that works better. And God's plan says all sufficiency at all times, but only if I'm willing to do good work. So I began to realize that I had been telling a lie to myself and to my family for many, many, many decades. And that lie that I was telling myself and telling my family was that I was doing all that hard work for them. We men, and we in the room so we can tell the truth, right? I was lying. I was doing all that hard work for myself, right? I was missing basketball games, working. I was missing events, working. I was missing birthdays, working, right? And the lie that I kept telling my family was, well, I would be there, but I got to go to, right? And I would say, but I'm working for, if I don't work, you can't go to that basketball game. If I don't work, you, right? That was a lie I told, right? But in reality, I was working for who? I was working for me, right? I wanted my name on the wall. I wanted them to call me Mr. Hughey. I was tired of them calling me boy. Right? All of that was about me, and it was for me, right? The problem with that was it wasn't good work. It was outside of God's system, right? So every time I would get 2 steps forward, what would happen? Every time I get a nickel, what would happen? Right? Right? I messed around and figured out how to get a whole dollar, and guess what happened? Right? So when I learned that I had to figure out how to switch my life around, right? And I had to turn my life around, I had to begin to focus on doing good work. And if I just focused on doing good work, God would provide all of the resources that I need. See, the reason why you're stuck at the economic level that you're at is because you're stingy. That's why you're where you are, right? You don't want to follow. That's okay. Y'all can't kick me out. Right? You following a system that told you to only focus in on you, when God's system, right, has a completely different goal, and that goal is to do good work, right? So when I began to really dig into good work, it led me to understanding that there were 3 steps in that process, right? So step number 1 was for me to learn how to become a disciple of Jesus Christ, right? And a disciple, so you have a clear understanding of what that word means. A disciple is somebody who looks like the leader, okay? So if you say you're a Christian, right, then you should look like who? You should look like Christ. I should see him in you and in your life, okay? Well, how does God define love? Right, so you're stingy. Right, you don't look like Christ. Right? So if I'm going to be a financial disciple of Christ, I had to understand 3 basic things. Number 1, he said, if you're going to be my disciple, then you had to do 3 things. The first thing you had to do was decide that you were going to take up your cross, right? And then you had to make a decision that you were going to follow him. And then you had to put yourself in a position where you had to deny yourself. So 3 steps in becoming a disciple. Step number 1 is to deny yourself. Step number 2 is to take up your cross. And step number 3 is to follow him. Now, I told y'all I was going to bridge the gap, right? So here's where we begin to walk, right? So step number 1, to become a financial disciple of Christ, you got to learn how to deny yourself. Step number 1 means you have to learn how to live on a budget, right? That is not a bad word, right? And I'm not going to give you the politically correct one that they're using now, calling a spending plan. No, you learn how to live on a budget, right? Who works at a business that doesn't have a budget? Anybody? Anybody work at a business that don't have a budget? Okay. So if every business in America runs off a budget, how does your personal business not? How are you ever going to get ahead financially if you refuse to function the way every successful organization has for a millennia? Step number 1, you got to learn to deny yourself and learn how to live on a budget. Step number 2 says take up your cross, right? Which means you got to do what? You got to review your budget. It don't do no good to write the budget if you're not going to check it, right? And I mean every account every month. I pull every credit card statement. I look at every transaction. I pull bank accounts for all my businesses, and I look at every transaction, right? Because whose money is it? It's God's money. I'm just the steward, right? And I know when he come back, he going to say, Joe, I gave you $1. What you do with my $1? Did you put my $1 to good work, or did you put my $1 to something selfish for yourself? Right? He's going to hold you accountable for that. So you got to do the homework, right? I set the budget up, then I got to review the budget. And step 3 was I had to learn how to follow Christ, right? That's the step 3. I had to learn how to follow Christ because I told you manhood was what? Leadership. Leadership, right? So if you're not learning or studying leadership, right, you're missing the key component of manhood, okay? So on the personal finance side, after I got the idea that came together with how I was supposed to do that, then I got into the why, right, or the how, right? I got into the how, right? So I'm going to run through this for you guys real quick, and then we're going to bridge the gap, and I'm going to get out your hair, right? So God's system for your personal finances is broken up into 4 types of giving, right? So we're going to go through the 4 types of giving, and I'm going to bridge the gap for you between God's system, how he set it up, and how it functions in today's society, right? So the first type of giving in the Bible is the tithe. You can find it in Malachi chapter 3, verse 8 through 12. That's not a cuss word. All right, so let's move past that, right? God has a system. You can either choose to participate in the system or you can choose not to participate in the system. So the motivation behind your tithing is obedience. It's the entryway into the system, right? So I'm going to give you a worldly example of that, right? Have you ever walked into a bank, walked up to the counter, and asked the teller to withdraw some money, right? What's the first thing the teller does? Check your balance. Can you withdraw more money than there is in your account? Okay, so we all agree that there's a rule to a system, right? Okay? You can't enter the world's banking system, right, and not make no deposit and then make a withdrawal. So you can sit and pray to God for 3,000 hours, pour oil on your head, spin around 10 times. You ain't made no deposit. You can't make no withdrawal. Right? That's how the system works, right? He's not going to change the system to accommodate you, right? So the doorway is the tithe, and the motivation is obedience. God said, look, hey, you can do it your way or you can do it my way, right? So if you go through Malachi and everybody gets to the big parts, I'm just going to jump you down to the end because I told you, read it forward and then do what? Read it backwards. So if you read all the way down to the end of that passage of Scripture, verse 12, it says, and you shall become a delightsome land. Pastor English Standard Version kind of guy. I'm a King James guy. It says, you shall become a delightsome land, right? So I'm going to help you to understand what a delightsome land is, right? So you ever been to a garden or a farm fully functioning, right? That's got fruits, vegetables, and animals, like just a fully functioning farm, right? Okay? Do they smell very good? No, they don't. Right? They don't smell very good, right? But do they produce? Right? So see, he said be a delightsome land. That means you're supposed to be a resource that people can come to, right? That's a delightsome land, right? You're supposed to be in a position where you're well received, right? So I'm going to bridge the gap to you, right? You want to buy a new car. Okay? You want to buy a new car, right? Some of us, when we arrive at the dealership, will be treated like a delightsome land. They're going to say, Mr. Hughey, come on in. Mr. Hughey, which car do you want? What color do you want? If they don't have it, they will go get it from some other place and bring it to me, right? That's because I have a quality credit score. It's a tool. It's a resource, right? Okay? Those pieces of the puzzle, that is a delightsome land, right? You're putting yourself in a position where you are well received, right? But during COVID, I thoroughly enjoyed the financial opportunities that COVID presented. I didn't enjoy COVID, but I did enjoy the money piece, right? The banks didn't even require you to come in and get money during COVID. They mailed checks to my house and said, just sign right here. Just sign right here, right? Understanding the position that you put yourself in follows God's system, okay? So if you keep reading back a little bit, he tells you exactly how to become a delightsome land, right? The piece of the puzzle that I always like to highlight about choosing the tithe is God promises you that he will rebuke the devourer. Who is the devourer? Okay, that's the typical answer I get. But I ain't never seen no pitchfork dude show up at my house and ask me for no money. Right? Double-digit interest rates. That's the devourer, right? NSF fees. That's the devourer, right? Okay? 40-year mortgages. God. Right? That's the devourer, right? So you know, you got to identify your enemy if you ever going to intend on beating the enemy. Okay? So when I understood that by tithing, giving God 10% of my gross pay, right, I put myself under God's protection. He said he was going to protect me from the devourer, right, which meant he was going to lead me, right, into the financial decisions that were going to get me to the best credit score. That was because then I can borrow money at the lowest rates possible, right? Y'all realize you know you can borrow money at 1.5% today, right? That's prime rates, right? Now you got to be in position to get 1.5, right? But that's prime lending, right? At 1.5%, right? So when you began to study the tithe, you understood that it's my entryway into the system. God promises me that he's going to protect all the rest of my money, and he's going to help me to defeat the devourer, okay? Well, look, if you just got there financially, you be in a better position. If you ever want to be wealthy, you're going to have to learn how to live on 70% of what you make. If you can't learn how to live on 90, how you ever going to get to 70, right? So what God is trying to teach you with the tithe, he's simply trying to teach you his system, his way of doing things, right? Now, remember, I'm going to take you back, and I'm going to speed up from here, right? Where did that system come from? It came from the brothers, right? The 11 brothers brought their 10% back to the storehouse, right, so that Levi could, one, take care of his family. We got to take care of Pastor. Two, that the resources would be in the house to take care of the community. So if you're not participating in God's system, you're not participating in taking care of the community, right? Which means you're working for who? Yourself. Is that good work? Nope, that's not good work. All right, number 2, right? Step 2 was your first fruits, right? Was your first fruits. So you find that in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9 through 10. And God said there, honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thy increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and their vats burst out with new wine. That's what it says, right? So they were an agricultural society, right? So they grew crops, they raised animals, right? Then they had a harvest, okay? So during the harvest, the first batch, the first reception from the harvest went to the storehouse, okay? So did they give God what was left over, or did they give God the best? Right. So if in your financial plan is, well, I'm going to pay everybody else, I'm going to give everywhere else, and if I got $1 left, I'm going to get that to God. You fighting against the system. He said first fruits. The motivation behind your first fruits is generosity, right? Here's your opportunity to show God that you are generous, right? And stop and think about it, right? For those of you who have children. Right? You got an obedient child and a disobedient child. Which one get most of your resources? Right? Why is God any different? Right? You want to be a disobedient child, and then you want access to God's resources. That ain't how that works. Right? He said he a good father. He told us we okay, that's another subject for another day, right? But understand first fruits, right? So then he said that your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will burst out with new wine. So here's the bridge, right? Who in here has a physical barn? Anybody? Right? So when you read that passage of scripture, you go, I ain't got no barn. I don't know what they're talking about, right? Okay. Who in here has a savings account? Right? Got a 401k? Got an IRA? Right? Okay. Those are your financial barns. Isn't that where you store up your resources? What is a barn? A place to store up your resources, right? So in general banking, in a regular checking account, the maximum amount of money you can have in a regular checking account is $250,000. Once you get $250,000 in $1, you go get a phone call from the bank. I ain't got that phone call yet, but I'm getting close. And they gonna say you need to open up another account, right? Because that's the maximum amount of money you're allowed to have in any one account. Okay? Why is that? Right. So if the bank was a safe place to keep your money, why do they have insurance? You ever stop to think about that? Why do y'all need insurance to protect my money, right? Because here's why. The bank doesn't actually have any of its own money. All the money in the world's banking system belongs to you. You put that money in that checking account, you put that money in that savings account, and the bank loaned it out the very next minute, right? I remember as a kid, you used to go to the bank and you could get large sums of money. Try that now. Go to the bank and ask for 50 grand. They're going to tell you got to come back. They ain't got it. They do not have $50,000 in cash sitting in the bank. It's going to take them a couple of days, right? Why? Because they don't actually have none of your money, right? Okay? So understanding your barns in modern society, right, are your investment accounts, your savings accounts. Those are your bonds, right? Now, how many of you all have been trying to fill up your bonds yourself? Well, Proverbs told us who was going to fill up our bonds? God, right? Proverbs told us God was going to fill up our bonds, right? So if you participate in God's system, it's God's job to fill up your bonds, not yours. Think of all of that pressure that just came off of you when you let God fill up your bonds, right? He then went on to say that your vats would burst out with new wine, right? So your vats bursting out with new wine. What that means is that God's going to go and jump into business with you, right? So during their time, nobody wanted old wine. Why? They didn't have refrigeration. Now, today, the older the bottle, the what? The more it costs, right? Okay? But back then, if you could produce new wine, you had all the customers. So he said, if you will participate in my system, I'm going to make sure your vat burst out new wine, right? So God's saying, I'll be your business partner. I'll jump into business with you, and I'll be responsible for bringing you the customers. Who gets to set the price? You get to set the price, and God's going to bring you the customers, right? But if you're stingy, you don't get God as a business partner, and you got to go find all them customers by yourself, all right? I got to speed up because I ain't got a couple more minutes, and I still got a little ways to go. All right, number 3 is alms. Almsgiving. Almsgiving, your motivation in your almsgiving is compassion, right? That's giving to each other, right? So somebody walked up to you, they needed something, you reached into your pocket, and you gave it to them, right? Felt good about yourself. Here's the problem. God ain't tell you to do it that way. God did not tell you to do it that way. Matthew chapter 6, verse 1 through 4, God gives us his plan of how we're supposed to take care of those in need, right? So remember, in God's banking system, what was the storehouse? The church, right? So where were people who needed stuff supposed to get those resources from? The church. So your overage was supposed to go to the right, and then the church was supposed to take care of those people, right? So you inserted yourself in as the church, but then you don't want none of the responsibilities of being the church. The motivation behind your almsgiving is compassion, and it's the only type of giving that goes from man to man, right? But it's supposed to go through God's system, not outside of God's system, and the reason why is because who gets the credit? So God says if you lend to the poor, he will repay, right? So first and foremost, what's the math of almsgiving? Dollar for dollar. Ain't that what repay mean? So you gave some money to the poor, and God promised you he was going to give you back what you gave him. So that's why people run around and they say giving don't work, right? They're like, I give to the poor all the time. I don't never have no money. He ain't promised you to have no money if you gave to the poor. He said he was going to give you back what you gave. Unless you got the praise for it. You got to understand the system. You can't make the system do what you want the system to do. So when you give somebody something, what do they say back to you? Thank who? Thank who? Okay, does that mean that God got the praise or you got the praise? Okay, you ain't getting that money back. Don't charge that to God. You did that out of your own desire, and therefore you get your own results, right? His system says don't let your left hand know what the right hand is doing. What you do in private, I will reward you for in public, right? I don't have time to tell y'all that story, but watch the YouTube. I was 41 years old before I figured that one out, and once I figured that one out, I became a cheerful giver, right? God put me in rooms to give money away. Y'all got to come back for that one. All right, number 4 is the seed. The purpose behind your seed giving is faith and reward. In Mark chapter 4, verse 3 through 9, probably one of the most preached passages of scripture in the Bible, right? So it's the story of the sower, right? So I am an investment advisor. The sower went out to sow 4 times. He lost money 3 out of the 4. Now, I wouldn't have one client if I lost them money 3 out of 4 times, right? He was a horrible investor. That's the point I'm trying to get a point to, right? He was not good at it at all, right? Now, most of us would quit before we got to level 4, okay? So you learn to hear from God financially in level 3, when God begins to tell you how to give and where to give. That's where you learn to hear from God, right? So if you're not tithing, if you're not giving your first fruits, God is not telling you to give your money away. You are not getting that information from God because you're not even on God's finance team, right? So I used to tell people that Slurpees cost $20. Everybody be like, what kind of Slurpees is you buying that cost $22? What kind of Slurpees you buying cost $22, right? Every time I would go to Wawa, there would be somebody standing out front, right? My wife wanted a Slurpee. I go to Wawa to get her $2 Slurpee, but it'd be somebody standing out front asking for money. I get them $20, and I buy her $2 Slurpee. Slurpees cost me $22, right? So this particular day, guy standing out front, I'm pumping gas. I go in the store. I didn't have the $20 when I went in, so I just got the extra cash, and I gave it to him on my way out, and he took off running. This painter pulled up a few minutes later, got out of his truck. He was walking around looking. He went in the store looking, came out of the store looking, got back in his van and drove away, right? The Holy Spirit said to me at that time, he said, I sent that painter to find that man to give him a job for the rest of his life. You gave him that $20, and he thought that was from me, and he took that as the gift. Don't ever give another dollar that I don't tell you to give. See, you think you're doing God's work, and you in God's way. You ain't even on the team. You ain't even getting the download, right? You just trying because you feel guilty because you didn't get no tithe, right? Step number 4 is the seed. Faith and reward is the motivation behind the seed. And here is where we get into God's promise to give you 30, 60, and 100-fold blessing, right? Now, everybody love that story. Man, 30, 60, 100-fold blessing. I'm going to show you the fastest way to get out of debt. Learn how to turn $1 into $100, right? If you can learn how to turn $1, because can everybody find $1? So if I can learn how to turn $1 into $100, I can get rid of all my bills in a relatively short period of time. Well, how do you do that, right? You got to do that through God's seed system, right? So the sower went out to sow. He did not know what he was doing. He was simply following God's instructions. God told him where to sow and then how to get that return. So let me help you. God's minimum return is 30 times. 30, 60, or 100, right? Do not call me looking for no 30-time return. The world does not offer those on any type of consistent basis, right? Every now and then we look up and get one, right? The stock market on any 20-year period of time you choose has averaged between 10 and 12%. God's worst return is 30. How do you get there, right? You got to follow the steps in the system to get into that place where God can reward you, right? So I was listening to Jesse Duplantis, and I'm going to wrap up from here. I was listening to Jesse Duplantis, and he told a story about seed giving. So they were doing a revival, and he had invited 2 other pastors into town, right? One lived in New Orleans with him, and the other one lived outside. The one that lived in New Orleans with him said, hey, man, come on, I want to go show you this plot of land. So they all got in the car. They went out and looked at the land. It was sitting in a swamp, right, in the middle of nowhere. You couldn't build nothing, right? So Jesse and the other preacher was like, what are we going to do with this land, right? The guy was like, well, it's only $3,000, and God told me to buy it. He was like, Jesse said I had the $1,000 in my pocket, right? So the guy was like, okay, look, I'm going to get it anyway, right? Bought the piece of land. 5 years later, the state of Louisiana wanted to build a overpass. And underneath the overpass, you have to have the structural thing to hold up the overpass. Guess what plot of land they needed? Sold it for $3 million. Because the state had to have it to build the overpass, right? See, God been talking to you all the time. You just can't hear him. Because that sounded crazy, right? That sounded like an impossible thing to happen, right? But it's because you're not a part of his system that it sounds that way. You learn to hear from God through step 1, step 2, and step 3. So when step 4 comes into your life, right, you move when God tells you to move, right? Those are all of the pieces of the puzzle. We've got to learn how to study God's system to pull all of those things together. So in wrapping up, I'm going to give you guys 5 areas to focus in on in building your personal finances, right? 5 steps in the process. Step number 1 is protection. Step number 1 is protection, right? You have to make sure that all of the risk that you are exposed to have some sort of protection coverage over them, right? So that's your health insurance, right? Which we're going to get ready to learn about here in a few minutes, right? That would be your life insurance, right? If you're not here, your family still needs those pieces of the puzzle, right? The third piece of that puzzle in the protection space is disability insurance. What happens if you can't work, right? How them bills going to get paid, right? I got to have those protections in place to make sure that I'm covered in that space, right? Your homeowner's insurance, your automobile insurance, property and casualty, those are your protection pieces. I got to have that. The second step in the process after I build my protection pieces of the puzzle is I got to begin to plan to get free, okay? Got to begin to plan to get free, right? And freedom, I express that in an income amount, right? So if I had $150,000 a year coming in that I didn't have to work for, does Monday morning look a little different? Right? Are you going to that job or are you going to do something different? Right? So you need a $2 million portfolio at 8%, get you somewhere between $120,000 and $160,000 a year, right? That is that structural piece of the puzzle that we're looking to put together to get you in that space. That's step number 2, right? I got to save and invest to build that platform for freedom. Step number 3 is going to be your estate planning, right? Step number 3 is your estate planning, right? All right, so those are your wills and your trusts, right? So if you got less than $1 million in assets, you don't need a trust. Just write that up in the will. If you got more than $1 million, we can talk about it, right? Okay? Here's the reason why. Your trust has to have money. A trust with no money, no funding source, is a useless piece of paper, right? So if you set the trust up, but you didn't set up funding for the trust, all they're going to do is sell off all your assets. That's all that's going to happen, okay? But that's step number 3 is your estate planning. Step number 4 is your legacy planning, right? Is your legacy planning, right? Because God says that you are worse than an infidel if you don't take care of your children's children. What's your plan for your children's children, okay? So your legacy planning, right? How am I going to take all that I've learned, all that I've gained, all that I controlled, and pass it on to the next generation, right? And then step number 5 is the good work, right? Step number 5 is the good work, right? I got to get you free so that you can do the good work, right? So once I get you free financially, right, and you're in a position where you are no longer controlled by how much money you make, that's true domination, that's true dominion, that's true freedom. Now you can go and focus in on the good work. And what does our community look like? With dozens of hundreds or thousands of financially stable African-American men who can just focus in on doing good work in the community. What does it look like? Right? So you see why the devil is so much after your money? And he's so much after your money mentality, because if you ever get this right, we fix a whole bunch of problems within our community. So those are the 5 areas to focus your attention on. Those are the 4 steps in the space, God's system for your personal financial success. In your folders, that you have with you there are just some highlights that I put in the folder for you. Yep, I'll get you. It's some highlights that I put in the folder for you guys. Some thoughts about investing strategies. Some notes in there about your wills and your trusts. Those individual pieces of the puzzle. Those are just some highlights. If you want some more information, I'll be here all day. We can talk about it. Can I do 2 questions? 2 questions. That's it. Protection. Protection was step number 1. All right, that was question number 1. So we got time for one more. Then I'm gonna get out the way and turn the microphone over. Anybody? The 4 types of giving are the tithe, first fruits, alms, and seed. Are the 4 types of giving. And each one has its own system and its own requirements. You got to dig into them individually, but those are the 4 types of giving. All right. Thank you, guys.